Zafrina's hands trembled as she stuffed clothes into a tattered bag. Her mind raced, replaying the chilling conversation she overheard between Gino Ferrer and his associates. The man she thought cared for her had sinister plans to control her, to trap her in his web of power. Gino, one of the wealthiest and most feared men in their town, had become dangerously obsessed with her. The dim glow of the moon lit her way as she fled from her abuela's home. Leaving her beloved grandmother behind broke her heart, but staying was no longer an option. Zafrina couldn't risk Gino finding her, nor could she bear the thought of dragging her family into his dangerous world. She vanished into the night, determined to start a new life far from his reach. Weeks later, she found herself in a quiet coastal town, its serene beauty a stark contrast to the chaos she left behind. She secured a job at a quaint bookstore, living a modest and peaceful life. For the first time in months, Zafrina felt a sense of safety. But the shadows of her past lingered. Every time someone entered the shop or glanced her way, she felt her stomach knot with fear. Despite the town's tranquility, she couldn't fully shake the paranoia that Gino might find her. The town's annual festival was an event Zafrina had avoided during her first few weeks there. But this time, curiosity got the better of her. She blended into the crowd, marveling at the colorful lights, lively music, and laughter that filled the air. As she wandered through the bustling square, her eyes landed on a man who made her blood run cold. It was Marco, her cousin's fiancé and one of Gino's trusted allies. He hadn't noticed her yet, but panic coursed through her veins. If Marco was here, it was only a matter of time before Gino found her. Zafrina turned and rushed back to her small apartment, her mind racing with plans to leave. She couldn't stay, not after seeing Marco. Her heart ached at the thought of abandoning the life she had started to build, but survival came first. That night, as she packed her belongings, she heard a knock at the door. Fear gripped her, and she froze. Who could it be at this hour? Slowly, she peeked through the peephole. The man standing there was unfamiliar, but his presence exuded authority. He was tall, with sharp features and an air of arrogance that seemed to radiate from him. Zafrina hesitated, but eventually opened the door. The man introduced himself as Sovereign Millares, a name that immediately sparked recognition. He was a billionaire known for his ruthless business tactics and reserved demeanor. But what was he doing here? "I've been watching you," Sovereign said bluntly, his deep voice both unsettling and intriguing. "Don't be alarmed. I'm not here to harm you. In fact, I might be your only way out." Zafrina's instinct screamed to slam the door in his face, but the desperation in his eyes stopped her. "What do you mean?" she asked, cautiously. "I know who you are, Zafrina. I also know who's after you, Gino Ferrer." His words sent a chill down her spine. "I can help you disappear, but you'll need to do something for me in return." "What could I possibly do for someone like you?" she asked, her voice laced with skepticism. Sovereign smirked, the expression both infuriating and magnetic. "I need a wife, or rather, the appearance of one. I have a business deal hinging on my marital status. You pretend to be my wife, and I'll make sure no one, not even Gino, can find you." Zafrina stared at him, incredulous. The idea was absurd, yet strangely tempting. Sovereign promised her the one thing she craved most, safety. But the thought of pretending to be married to a man she just met, especially one as arrogant as him, made her stomach churn. "Think it over," Sovereign said, handing her a card with his number. "But don't take too long. Time isn't on your side." As he walked away, Zafrina sank onto the couch, clutching the card in her hand. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: fear, confusion, and a sliver of hope. Could this man truly protect her? And at what cost? Zafrina spent the night pacing her small apartment, Sovereign's card clutched tightly in her hand. His words echoed in her mind. "I'll make sure no one, not even Gino, can find you." Could she trust him? He was a stranger, after all, but his offer was tempting. Gino's reach was vast, and she had no resources to keep running on her own. By morning, Zafrina made her decision. She dialed the number on the card, her fingers trembling. Sovereign answered almost immediately, his voice calm and assured. "Good choice," he said after she explained her decision. "Meet me at the Grand Meridian Hotel this afternoon. We'll finalize the details." Later that day, Zafrina arrived at the luxurious hotel, her anxiety mounting as she stepped into the grand lobby. Sovereign was waiting for her, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. His commanding presence unsettled her, but she straightened her shoulders, determined not to show weakness. "I see you've decided to trust me," he said, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "I don't have much of a choice, do I?" she replied, meeting his gaze with defiance. Sovereign led her to a private conference room, where he laid out the terms of their arrangement. "You'll live with me as my wife. In public, we'll be the perfect couple, but behind closed doors, we'll keep our distance. This is strictly a business arrangement." Zafrina hesitated. "And what happens when the deal is over?" "You'll be free to go, with enough resources to start a new life wherever you want," Sovereign assured her. Though his words were convincing, Zafrina couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Sovereign's motives. But with no better options, she signed the agreement, sealing her fate. The following day, Sovereign sent a car to pick up Zafrina and take her to his estate. As she approached the massive iron gates, her jaw dropped at the sight of his sprawling mansion. The grandiose structure was a stark reminder of the world she was stepping into, a world of wealth, power, and secrets. Sovereign greeted her at the entrance, his expression unreadable. "Welcome to your new home," he said, gesturing for her to follow him inside. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and walls adorned with priceless artwork. Zafrina felt out of place, her modest upbringing a sharp contrast to the opulence surrounding her. "Let's get one thing straight," Sovereign said as they entered his office. "While you're here, you'll need to adapt. I've arranged for a personal stylist and etiquette coach to prepare you for public appearances. My reputation depends on this charade, and I won't tolerate any slip-ups." Zafrina bristled at his tone, but bit back a retort. She reminded herself that this was her only chance to escape Gino's clutches. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. Zafrina was given a new wardrobe filled with designer clothes, trained in the art of social etiquette, and coached on how to present herself as Sovereign's wife. It was exhausting, but she threw herself into the role, determined to succeed. Despite her efforts, her fiery personality often clashed with Sovereign's controlling nature. Their arguments were frequent, but there was an undeniable chemistry between them that neither could ignore. Sovereign's first public appearance with Zafrina came sooner than expected. He was attending a high-profile charity gala, and she was expected to accompany him as his loving wife. Zafrina's nerves were on edge as she stepped out of the limousine, her hand resting on Sovereign's arm. The flashing cameras and murmurs of the crowd were overwhelming, but she forced herself to smile, remembering her training. "You'll be fine," Sovereign murmured, his voice low and steady. Inside the gala, Zafrina found herself surrounded by the elite of society. Their curious gazes and probing questions made her uneasy, but Sovereign was always by her side, guiding her through the event with ease. At one point, a nosy socialite cornered Zafrina, asking about their relationship. "You must feel so lucky to have landed a man like Sovereign," she said with a sly smile. Zafrina hesitated, unsure how to respond, but Sovereign intervened smoothly. "I'm the lucky one," he said, his arm slipping around Zafrina's waist. His words and the way he looked at her were so convincing that even Zafrina almost believed him. As the night wore on, Zafrina began to relax. She played her role perfectly, earning Sovereign's silent approval. But as they returned to the mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that their charade was becoming dangerously real. Sitting in the car beside Sovereign, Zafrina found herself stealing glances at him. There was something about his quiet strength and the way he had protected her throughout the evening that made her heart race. But she quickly pushed those thoughts aside. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. Little did she know, Sovereign was having similar thoughts. Watching Zafrina navigate the gala with grace and determination, he felt an unfamiliar stir of admiration and something deeper that he wasn't ready to acknowledge. The days following the gala were quieter, but no less intense. Zafrina's life had transformed into a whirlwind of luxury, expectations, and secrecy. Though the charade had gone smoothly at the gala, she sensed Sovereign observing her more closely, as if trying to unravel her secrets. One afternoon, Zafrina found herself wandering through the sprawling garden behind the mansion. She welcomed the quiet, away from the etiquette lessons and constant scrutiny. Yet her moment of peace was interrupted by Sovereign's deep voice. "You've adapted faster than I expected," he said, approaching her with his usual confidence. "I didn't have much of a choice," Zafrina replied, glancing at him. "But I'm curious, why me? You could have chosen anyone to play your wife. Why someone like me, who doesn't belong in this world?" Sovereign's expression softened for a moment, as though he was debating whether to reveal something personal. "Because you're real," he finally said. "This world is full of people who'd sell their souls for money or power. You, on the other hand, have no interest in either. That makes you trustworthy." Zafrina frowned. "Trustworthy? You don't even know me." "Perhaps not yet," Sovereign admitted, "but I plan to." His cryptic words left her unsettled, but there was no time to dwell on them. That evening, Sovereign informed her that they'd be hosting a dinner party for some of his most influential business partners. It would be her first time playing the role of hostess, and the pressure was immense. The mansion was transformed into a picture of elegance for the dinner party. Zafrina, dressed in a stunning emerald gown, stood beside Sovereign as they greeted the guests. Though her nerves threatened to overwhelm her, she maintained a composed demeanor, determined not to embarrass herself or Sovereign. As the evening progressed, Zafrina noticed how effortlessly Sovereign commanded the room. His charisma and intelligence were undeniable, and she couldn't help but feel a pang of admiration for him. But the night took a turn when one of the guests, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria, began questioning Zafrina about her past. "You're quite the enigma," Victoria said with a sly smile. "Where did Sovereign find you?" Before Zafrina could respond, Sovereign stepped in, his voice cold and authoritative. "My wife's past is none of your concern, Victoria." The tension was palpable, but Victoria backed down, muttering an apology. Zafrina was grateful for Sovereign's intervention, yet she couldn't ignore the suspicion lingering in Victoria's gaze. Later, as the guests left, Sovereign approached Zafrina. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said, his tone almost approving. "Thanks to your constant coaching," she replied, her voice tinged with sarcasm. Sovereign smirked. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Zafrina. Don't forget that." The following morning, Zafrina woke early, eager to avoid another round of Sovereign's grueling etiquette lessons. She ventured into the library, a massive room filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. She was lost in thought, running her fingers along the spines of the books, when she heard Sovereign's voice behind her. "You like to read?" he asked, startling her. "I used to," she admitted. "It was my escape when things got difficult." Sovereign's expression softened. "What kind of books?" "Anything that could take me away from reality," she said with a small smile. "Fiction, mostly. Stories about people finding hope even in the darkest times." For a moment, Sovereign looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. "You're more interesting than I expected," he said, his voice low. Zafrina frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're not just some woman running from her past. There's more to you, and I want to understand it." His words left her feeling exposed, as though he could see through the walls she'd built around herself, but she refused to let him get too close. "I'm not here to be understood, Sovereign. I'm here because of a deal we made. Let's not forget that." Sovereign nodded, but there was a glint in his eyes that made her uneasy. "Fair enough, but deals can change, Zafrina. Don't forget that either." As the days passed, Zafrina found herself growing more comfortable in Sovereign's world, yet she remained guarded. Though his arrogance often grated on her nerves, there were moments when she glimpsed a different side of him, a side that was protective, even kind. But she couldn't afford to let her guard down. Sovereign was a man with his own secrets, and Zafrina knew better than to trust anyone fully. Unbeknownst to her, Sovereign was also grappling with unexpected emotions. He had agreed to this arrangement for purely practical reasons, but Zafrina's strength and vulnerability intrigued him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Both of them were caught in a delicate dance, their walls slowly crumbling as they navigated the complexities of their arrangement. And though neither of them realized it yet, their lives were about to become even more intertwined. Sovereign was pacing his study late at night when a phone call came in from one of his most trusted informants. The information he received sent a chill down his spine. Gino Ferrer has expanded his search. He's looking for Zafrina in places we didn't anticipate, the informant reported. Sovereign's grip on the phone tightened. He had promised Zafrina safety, but Gino's resources were proving to be more extensive than he had anticipated. After ending the call, he stared out the window, his mind racing. He needed to act fast to keep Zafrina protected, but how could he ensure her trust while keeping her at arm's length? The next morning, Sovereign's demeanor was noticeably tense. Zafrina picked up on it during breakfast, but she hesitated to ask, unsure if she wanted to know what was bothering him. Her own instincts told her that something was amiss. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. Sovereign looked at her, his eyes shadowed with an emotion she couldn't place. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said curtly, but Zafrina wasn't convinced. Later that day, Sovereign ordered a full security upgrade to the mansion. Cameras were installed, guards were posted, and every entrance and exit was monitored. Zafrina, noticing the sudden changes, confronted him. "What's all this about?" she demanded, her voice tinged with frustration. "You said I was safe here." "You are safe," Sovereign replied, his tone firm, "but I'm taking precautions. Gino's search has intensified, and I won't take any risks." Zafrina's heart sank. She had hoped to escape the shadow of Gino Ferrer, but it seemed his influence was inescapable. Despite the heightened security, Sovereign couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. His instincts proved correct one evening when a suspicious vehicle was spotted near the estate. Sovereign was in his office when one of the guards rushed in. "Sir, there's a car parked down the road. It's been there for hours." Without hesitation, Sovereign grabbed his coat and headed outside. Zafrina, who had overheard the commotion, followed him despite his protests. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice sharp with concern. "I'm not staying inside while you handle this alone," she retorted, her defiance shining through. As they approached the vehicle, it sped off, leaving nothing but tire marks on the pavement. Sovereign cursed under his breath, but Zafrina remained silent, her mind racing. Back at the mansion, Sovereign pulled Zafrina aside. "This is why you need to listen to me. If something happened to you..." He trailed off, his jaw clenched. "Why do you care so much?" Zafrina asked, her voice trembling. For a moment, Sovereign seemed vulnerable, his usual stoicism slipping away. "Because I made a promise to protect you, and I don't break my promises." Zafrina was taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. Though their arrangement was supposed to be purely transactional, she couldn't deny the growing connection between them. The incident brought Sovereign and Zafrina closer, though neither of them was ready to admit it. They spent more time together, their conversations growing more personal. Sovereign shared glimpses of his past, revealing a side of himself that few people ever saw. "I wasn't always this cold," he admitted one evening as they sat by the fireplace. "But in this world, showing emotion is a weakness." Zafrina listened intently, her own walls slowly crumbling. "You're not as cold as you think," she said softly. "You just hide it well." Their moments of vulnerability were often interrupted by the reality of their situation. Sovereign's business obligations and the looming threat of Gino Ferrer kept them on edge. Yet, despite the chaos, they found comfort in each other's presence. One night, Sovereign caught Zafrina in the library, reading a book she had found on the shelf. He leaned against the doorway, watching her with an expression that was equal parts amusement and admiration. "You look almost peaceful," he said, his voice breaking the silence. Zafrina looked up, startled. "I didn't hear you come in." "Clearly," he replied, stepping closer. "What are you reading?" She held up the book, a romantic novel that made him raise an eyebrow. "Escaping reality again?" he teased. "Sometimes fiction is better than the real world," she shot back, a hint of a smile on her lips. Their banter was light, but the tension between them was undeniable. As Sovereign sat down beside her, their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the lines between their arrangement and their true feelings blurred. But before anything could happen, the sound of a distant alarm shattered the moment. Sovereign jumped to his feet, his protective instincts kicking in. "Stay here," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Zafrina watched him leave, her heart pounding. She realized that her feelings for Sovereign were becoming harder to ignore, but she couldn't afford to let herself fall for him. Not when her life was still in danger and their arrangement had an expiration date. Little did she know, Sovereign was grappling with the same conflict. Though he had entered the arrangement with clear boundaries, Zafrina's presence had stirred something in him that he hadn't felt in years, and as the threats around them grew, so did his determination to keep her safe, no matter the cost. The alarm that shattered the quiet night was no false alarm. Sovereign stormed through the corridors, barking orders to his security team as the tension in the mansion thickened. Zafrina remained in the library, her fingers gripping the edges of the book she'd been reading, but her mind was racing with fear and curiosity. Minutes felt like hours until Sovereign returned. His usually composed face was tense, and his suit was slightly disheveled. "It was a breach attempt," he said, his voice calm but sharp. "Someone tried to access the grounds through the west side." Zafrina felt a chill run down her spine. Was it Gino's people? Sovereign sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I can't confirm, but it's a possibility. Whoever it was, they were professionals. They managed to escape before we could catch them." She looked at him, her fear evident. "What does this mean? Are they getting closer to finding me?" Sovereign walked over to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "As long as you're here, you're under my protection. No one is getting to you. Not Gino, not anyone." Zafrina wanted to believe him, but her instincts told her otherwise. Despite Sovereign's confidence, the threat felt too close for comfort. The next morning, Sovereign summoned his most trusted advisor, Marcus, to discuss the situation. Zafrina, refusing to be left out of the conversation, insisted on being present. "We need to mislead whoever's after her," Sovereign said, his tone decisive. "Plant false leads, make them think she's somewhere else." Marcus nodded. "We can use some of the properties under your name to stage sightings, but we'll need to be subtle. Gino Ferrer isn't someone who's easily fooled." Zafrina listened silently, feeling like a pawn in a dangerous game. When the meeting ended, she confronted Sovereign. "You're going through so much trouble for me. Why?" Sovereign hesitated, his eyes locking onto hers. "Because I gave you my word, and because I care about what happens to you." His admission left Zafrina speechless. She had seen glimpses of Sovereign's softer side, but hearing him express genuine concern for her was unexpected. But before she could respond, Sovereign stepped back, his walls going up again. "Get some rest," he said curtly. "We'll be making some changes to the security protocol starting tomorrow." Days passed without incident, but the tension in the mansion remained palpable. Zafrina tried to distract herself by exploring the estate, but her mind was always on high alert. One evening, Sovereign found her sitting by the fountain in the garden. "I've been thinking," he said, taking a seat beside her. "That's dangerous," she teased, trying to lighten the mood. He smirked but quickly turned serious. "If we're going to keep up this charade, we need to make it more convincing. That means planning a proper wedding. One that's public enough to solidify our story, but discreet enough not to attract too much attention." Zafrina stared at him, stunned. "A wedding? We're already pretending to be married. Isn't that enough?" "It was enough for the gala," Sovereign said. "But if we're going to mislead Gino and anyone else who's looking for you, we need to make it look real. A public event like this will make people stop questioning your presence here." Zafrina's mind whirled. She had agreed to pretend to be Sovereign's wife, but a wedding, an actual ceremony, felt like a step too far. Yet, as she looked into Sovereign's determined eyes, she realized she had little choice. "When?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Soon," he replied. "Marcus is already working on the details. It'll be small, just a few witnesses and some photos to make it official." Zafrina nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. As she returned to her room that night, she couldn't help but wonder what she had gotten herself into. Meanwhile, Sovereign was in his study, staring at a photograph of his late parents. He had never imagined himself getting married, not even in a sham arrangement like this. But as he thought about Zafrina and the lengths he was going to protect her, he couldn't ignore the feelings that were beginning to stir within him. For both Sovereign and Zafrina, the lines between reality and pretense were becoming increasingly blurred, and neither of them could predict where their story would lead. The plans for the fake wedding came together quickly, thanks to Sovereign's efficiency and Marcus's meticulous attention to detail. Zafrina, however, felt like she was being swept away by a whirlwind. She had barely come to terms with the idea when Marcus presented her with a wedding dress. "This will be a low-profile event," Sovereign assured her as they went over the details. "Just a few people to make it look legitimate. Some trusted business associates, the photographer, and Marcus. No one who would leak information to the wrong parties." Zafrina examined the dress. It was elegant but understated, the kind of gown meant to draw admiration without inviting too much scrutiny. "It's beautiful," she admitted softly, though her heart was pounding with nerves. On the day of the wedding, Zafrina stood in front of a mirror, her reflection staring back at her in disbelief. She looked like a bride, but the emotions coursing through her were far from what a bride should feel. "Ready?" Marcus asked, knocking lightly on her door. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, taking a deep breath before following him to the ceremony. The ceremony was held in the estate's private garden, under the soft glow of twilight. Sovereign waited at the altar, his usual composed demeanor giving way to a slight tension in his jaw. When Zafrina appeared, escorted by Marcus, his breath caught. She was stunning, her simple elegance taking his breath away. For a moment, he forgot that this was all pretend. As she approached, Zafrina felt Sovereign's gaze and a strange flutter in her chest. She quickly pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. The officiant began the ceremony, reciting the traditional vows. Zafrina and Sovereign exchanged rings, their hands brushing briefly and sending a spark through both of them. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant said, and Sovereign hesitated for only a second before leaning in. The kiss was brief but electrifying, a moment that felt far too real for both of them. When they pulled away, neither could meet the other's eyes. After the ceremony, Marcus handed the couple a folder containing the legal documents to complete the illusion. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Millares," he said with a smirk. Zafrina couldn't help but laugh nervously. "This is the strangest thing I've ever done," she admitted. Sovereign glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You're not alone in that." The days following the wedding were surreal for Zafrina. She moved into Sovereign's master bedroom, though they maintained their separate spaces within the suite. The pretense of being a married couple felt strange, but the security measures seemed to have worked. The fake wedding had successfully thrown off Gino's men, at least for the moment. Reports indicated that they had shifted their search to a different city. Sovereign felt a sense of relief, though he knew it was temporary. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Zafrina asked, "Why did you do all this? You could have easily hidden me without going to such extremes." Sovereign set down his glass of whiskey and regarded her carefully. "Because this wasn't just about hiding you. It was about creating a story so convincing that no one would think to question it." And he paused, his voice softening. "Because I don't take promises lightly." Zafrina felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you," she said quietly. Their dynamic began to shift. They found themselves spending more time together, their conversations growing deeper. Sovereign opened up about his late parents and the burden of taking over the family business at a young age. Zafrina shared stories of her childhood and the challenges she faced with Gino's suffocating presence in her life. But as they grew closer, Sovereign couldn't ignore the growing pull he felt towards Zafrina. She was no longer just the woman he had agreed to protect. She was becoming someone he cared about deeply. Late one night, Sovereign found himself standing outside her room, his hand poised to knock. But he hesitated, unsure of what he would say if she answered. After a moment, he walked away, retreating to his own thoughts. Inside, Zafrina lay awake, her heart conflicted. She had entered this arrangement out of desperation, but Sovereign's actions and the man he was beneath the surface were starting to make her feel things she hadn't felt in years. Both of them were caught in a web of deception and truth, their feelings blurring the lines between what was real and what was pretend. And neither of them could deny that their fake marriage was becoming far more complicated than either had anticipated. As Sovereign and Zafrina adjusted to their new reality as a married couple, the lines between pretense and genuine affection continued to blur. Sovereign found himself watching her more often. How she laughed, how her face lit up when she talked about things she loved, and how she carried a quiet strength despite the dangers surrounding her. Zafrina noticed Sovereign's growing attention, but she dismissed it as him simply ensuring her safety. Yet, deep inside, she couldn't deny the way her heart fluttered when he was near, or how her thoughts lingered on him long after he left the room. Their closeness didn't go unnoticed. Marcus, ever observant, decided to have a word with Sovereign. "You're getting too attached," Marcus said bluntly as they stood on the balcony overlooking the estate. Sovereign's jaw tightened. "I'm just doing my job." Marcus smirked. "Since when does your job involve gazing at her like she's the only person in the room? Be careful, Sovereign. You're walking a fine line." Sovereign said nothing, but Marcus's words stayed with him. As Sovereign tightened security around the estate, he received a surprising piece of information. One of Gino Ferrer's former associates, a man named Carlos, wanted to meet with him. Carlos claimed to have information about Gino's plans and Zafrina's situation. Sovereign agreed to the meeting, but only under strict conditions. The encounter took place in a secluded location, with Sovereign's men stationed discreetly nearby. Carlos, a wiry man with sharp eyes, wasted no time. "Gino's obsession with Zafrina has reached dangerous levels," he said. "He's poured a fortune into finding her, and he's not above using violence to get what he wants." Sovereign's expression darkened. "Why are you telling me this? What's in it for you?" Carlos hesitated before replying. "Gino's crossed too many lines, and I don't want to be caught in the fallout. I also know that Zafrina doesn't deserve what he has planned for her. She's innocent in all this." Sovereign studied Carlos carefully, trying to gauge his sincerity. "If you're lying to me, I'll make sure you regret it." Carlos nodded, his face pale. "I'm not lying, but if you want to keep her safe, you need to move fast. Gino's closing in." When Sovereign returned to the estate, he immediately summoned Marcus and Zafrina. As he relayed Carlos's information, Zafrina's face turned pale. "He won't stop, will he?" she said, her voice trembling. "No," Sovereign admitted, "but neither will I. We'll outsmart him." That evening, Sovereign found Zafrina sitting by the fireplace in the library, staring into the flames. Her usual strength seemed to have faltered, and she looked lost in thought. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. She glanced at him and nodded. "Do you ever wonder how you ended up here? In this life?" Sovereign sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the fire. "All the time, but life doesn't always give us choices. Sometimes, we just have to play the hand we're dealt." Zafrina looked at him, her eyes filled with sadness. "I never wanted this. Running, hiding, living in fear. It's exhausting." Without thinking, Sovereign reached out and took her hand. "You're not alone in this anymore. I'm here, and I won't let anything happen to you." His words, spoken with such conviction, brought tears to Zafrina's eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of safety, a feeling she wasn't sure she could trust. As the night wore on, their conversation grew deeper. They shared pieces of themselves they hadn't revealed to anyone else. Sovereign talked about the pressures of his family legacy, and Zafrina opened up about her fears and dreams. By the time they parted ways for the night, something between them had shifted. The connection they had been trying to ignore was now undeniable. But as Sovereign lay awake in his room, he couldn't shake the thought of Carlos's warning. Gino was closing in, and the stakes were higher than ever. And in Zafrina's room, she clutched the necklace her abuela had given her, praying for strength to face whatever lay ahead. The morning after Sovereign's conversation with Zafrina, Marcus entered the study with grim news. Gino's men have been spotted in a nearby town, he said, placing a map on the desk. They're asking questions and offering rewards for information about her. Sovereign's jaw tightened. We need to stay ahead of him. Double security around the estate. No one comes in or out without clearance. Marcus nodded. Already done. But we need to consider what happens if they find us. We'll be ready, Sovereign replied, his voice cold and determined. Meanwhile, Zafrina tried to maintain her composure, but the news left her on edge. She spent the day wandering the estate's grounds, her mind racing with fears of being discovered. That evening, she found herself in the garden, staring up at the stars. Sovereign approached quietly, his presence both calming and unsettling. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said. I needed some air, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Sovereign studied her, his heart aching at the worry etched on her face. We'll get through this, Zafrina. I promise. She looked at him, searching his eyes for reassurance. You've already done so much for me. Why? He hesitated before answering, his voice softer than usual. Because I can't stand the thought of anything happening to you. Sovereign called a meeting with Marcus and Carlos to discuss their next move. Carlos had more information about Gino's operations, including the names of his most trusted allies. If we can disrupt his network, we can slow him down, Carlos suggested. It's risky, Marcus said, frowning, but it could work. We'd need to act quickly and strategically. Sovereign nodded. Do it. Gather the team and start implementing the plan. I'll handle the fallout if it comes to that. While Marcus and Carlos worked on the details, Sovereign turned his attention to Zafrina. He found her in the library, her brow furrowed as she pored over a book. Researching escape plans? He teased lightly. She looked up, managing a small smile. Just trying to distract myself. He sat across from her, his gaze intense. You don't have to face this alone, Zafrina. I'm here, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. His words brought a lump to her throat. She wanted to believe him, but the fear of Gino's reach was hard to shake. Late that night, the estate's security system detected an intruder. Alarms blared, and Sovereign was immediately alerted. He grabbed his gun and headed toward the commotion, his heart pounding. Zafrina, woken by the noise, peeked out of her room. Sovereign spotted her and quickly ushered her back inside. Stay here, he commanded, his voice firm. Lock the door and don't come out until I tell you. But no arguments, Zafrina, please. She nodded reluctantly, her hands trembling as she locked the door behind him. Sovereign and his security team found the intruder near the perimeter of the estate. It was one of Gino's men, trying to gather information. After a brief struggle, they subdued him and brought him inside for questioning. The man refused to talk at first, but Sovereign's icy demeanor and sharp interrogation skills eventually broke him. Gino knows she's here, the man admitted. He's planning to come himself. Sovereign's blood ran cold. He instructed his men to strengthen their defenses and immediately went to check on Zafrina. When he entered her room, she rushed to him, her face pale with worry. What happened? Just a scare, he said, trying to reassure her. But we need to be more careful. Gino's getting closer. The fear in her eyes was palpable. Sovereign placed his hands on her shoulders, his touch firm but gentle. "I won't let him take you, Zafrina. Not now, not ever." Her resolve faltered, and she leaned into him, seeking comfort in his strength. For a moment, all the walls she had built around herself crumbled, leaving her vulnerable in his arms. As he held her, Sovereign felt a surge of protectiveness unlike anything he had ever experienced. This wasn't just about fulfilling a promise anymore. It was about her, Zafrina, the woman who had captured his heart in ways he hadn't anticipated. But the danger was far from over, and both of them knew that the fight for their safety and their feelings was just beginning. The following days were tense. Sovereign doubled the estate's security, deploying more men to patrol the perimeter and watching for any sign of Gino's approach. Zafrina, however, remained in a state of heightened anxiety. She knew that Gino's obsession with her could not be ignored, and as much as she wanted to remain calm, the ever-present fear of being found lingered. Sovereign noticed the toll it was taking on her, but she tried to hide it. She kept busy with small tasks around the estate, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the strain in her eyes was impossible to miss. One evening, as they sat together in the dining room, Sovereign watched her quietly. He had grown more attuned to her moods and mannerisms, and it was clear she was on edge. "Zafrina," he began softly, his voice uncharacteristically tender. "I know you're scared, but you need to rest. Let me handle this." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and reluctance. "I don't want to be a burden. You've already done so much." Sovereign's lips curled into a faint smile, though there was a sadness behind his eyes. "You're not a burden, but I need you to be strong. We'll get through this together." His words, so full of conviction, wrapped around her heart like a lifeline. For the first time in days, Zafrina allowed herself to lean into the comfort of his reassurance. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps they could survive this. Sovereign knew the time was fast approaching when Gino would make his move. The tension was unbearable. He had gathered all the intelligence he could on Gino's movements, and the reports indicated that Gino was planning a direct assault. It would be soon, too soon for Zafrina to be prepared. That night, Sovereign confronted Marcus and Carlos in his study, their faces grim as they discussed their next steps. "We have to strike first," Sovereign said, his voice cold and steely. "If we wait for him to come to us, we'll be reacting. I'd rather be proactive." Carlos nodded. "We have contacts in the underground world who owe me favors. I can get us intel on Gino's exact location. We can use that to our advantage." Marcus gave a reluctant nod. "We'll do everything we can, but we have to be careful. Gino isn't someone to underestimate." Sovereign's expression hardened. "I won't underestimate him, but I won't let him take another step closer to Zafrina, either. I won't let her live in fear any longer." The night was heavy with tension as Sovereign prepared for the final confrontation with Gino. He had no illusions about the danger they were about to face, but there was something else fueling his determination: Zafrina. Her safety and their future together were all that mattered now. As the team geared up for the operation, Sovereign found Zafrina in the garden, her face pale and weary. She had been quieter than usual, lost in thought, as though bracing herself for something inevitable. Sovereign approached her quietly, his heart heavy. "Zafrina, whatever happens, I want you to know that I will always protect you, and I won't stop fighting until you're safe." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the world seemed to disappear around them. She reached up and touched his face gently, a small but meaningful gesture that spoke volumes. "I don't know what I would do without you," she whispered. Sovereign took her hand and held it to his chest. "You'll never have to find out. I'll be with you, always." Just then, his phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "It's time." With a final glance at Zafrina, Sovereign turned and walked toward the waiting convoy. The tension in his chest was palpable, but there was a sense of purpose in his every step. This was it. The moment they had been preparing for had arrived. As they reached the location where Gino was expected to make his move, Sovereign's heart raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation would change everything. Either it would be the end of their troubles, or it would bring even more danger to their doorstep. Gino's men were already waiting, and the standoff began. Sovereign's voice rang out through the chaos. "This ends tonight, Gino. You've hurt enough people. It's time to pay for what you've done." Gino, standing at the far end of the dark alley, smirked as he raised his gun. "You think you can stop me, Millares? You're playing a dangerous game." Sovereign's expression didn't falter. "I'm not playing, Gino. I'm ending it." The air was thick with tension as the first shots rang out. The ensuing battle was chaotic, but Sovereign's team was prepared. They had the upper hand, and Gino's forces quickly began to retreat. But just as Sovereign thought the worst was over, Gino appeared behind him, a gun aimed at Zafrina, who had been caught in the crossfire. "No!" Sovereign shouted, rushing forward, but it was too late. Gino's laughter echoed through the night. "You were always too late, Sovereign." With adrenaline coursing through his veins, Sovereign leapt forward, knocking the gun from Gino's hand. The two men struggled, but Sovereign's fury and determination were unmatched. With a final, powerful move, he incapacitated Gino and signaled to his men to take him into custody. Zafrina, who had been frozen in fear, rushed to Sovereign's side once the danger passed. She looked at him with gratitude and a mixture of relief and exhaustion. You saved me again." Sovereign, breathing heavily, looked down at her, his face softening. "I'll always save you, Zafrina. Always." As the dust settled and the danger passed, Zafrina knew that the future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She had found someone who would fight for her no matter what. And Sovereign, staring into her eyes, realized that in saving her, he had found a part of himself he didn't know he was searching for. Together, they would face whatever came next, knowing that they could overcome anything as long as they had each other. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.